So this was a project for a medical startup that was looking to. First off, I got Pix8 up in here, which is a now defunct prototyping tool that I use just for the kind of scroll area here for the onboarding screens. Google bought them and is now kind of rolling them out into some tools, but it's a good way to kind of do this stuff easier than Framer sometimes. And then on the right-hand side here, I've got my iPhone mirrored, so you can see me controlling it here. So what Sora did was they did clinical decision-making stuff, mostly in stroke and sepsis. They had some diagnostic tools to try to improve patient care. There was some event sharing stuff, real-time notifications, kind of group participation remotely or on the premise. And then there was a massive documentation and reporting kind of side to things. Before this kind of system, they noticed that, certainly in things like Code Blue, which is another kind of area this thing explores, people were writing things on their pants and just scraps of paper and that sort of stuff. The scope of this project was pretty big. A lot of it was converting forms like this, where nurses and doctors are spending, on average, about 3 hours kind of doing the documentation after certain events, or they were just not catching things. And sepsis in particular is something that costs hospitals millions and millions of dollars every year, because I think for KU especially, it's something like I think it's $12,000 a day if you get sepsis, and the average stay for a septic patient is something like 8 days. A certain amount of that a hospital doesn't actually get reimbursed for, especially if a client or a patient is readmitted, that sort of stuff. So the scope of this was pretty big. There was kind of these 3 initiatives. Code Blue is obviously pretty hardcore because you only have kind of a 3 to 10 minute window in a Code Blue situation, whereas stroke and sepsis can have diagnosis. That's an ongoing multiple hour kind of scenario. So stroke and sepsis were a lot more easy to deal with, at least for the time constraint. There were things like being able to tell if events were happening. The system could be integrated with the ambulance staff. So as they were coming into the hospital, they had already mapped a couple of these things because it made their lives a lot easier on the documentation side. There was also the ability to join remotely, that sort of thing. There were permissions. There's groups similar to Slack. All of this was kind of not architected or conceived of in an articulated way until I kind of joined into the project and kind of jumped into it. This is probably about 3 months of work or so. Other areas of interest here was a lot of design language was built out for this. So everything from like timers to warnings to just all these different types of forms and everything. It was actually a really good exercise in just building design language out for a enterprise grade EMR kind of thing. You can see there are different permutations of the timers here, warnings, that sort of stuff. There's certainly in the Code Blue side, you have a lot of things like amiodarone, epi, CPR timers, that sort of stuff, and then all kinds of different things down the way for that. And then we used InVision as our tool to kind of combine and get sign off for a lot of stuff. So